All right, so today we're going to dive deep into, this question that's been around forever. How do we find our purpose in life?
Hmm.
And to help us with this, we're going to look at the life and philosophy of somebody who really embodied purpose, right?
Mm.
Martin Luther King Jr. But
Yeah.
but we're going to do it with a twist,
Right.
right? We're going to use The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene
Right.
to to unpack, I guess, the strategies and the mindset that fueled MLK's impact.
Mm.
But more importantly, we're going to figure out how we can apply those to our own lives.
It's so fascinating because Green he starts off by highlighting, a very modern problem,
Okay?
the paradox of choice.
Right.
We're bombarded with options, probably more than any other time in history,
Mm.
and that can actually lead to this feeling of being aimless.
Yeah, it's like we're paralyzed by all the possibilities. I
Mm.
know I've felt that way. And what's really interesting is that even MLK, this icon of purpose,
Right.
he struggled with this early on.
Yeah.
Green kind of paints this picture of him, right? As this young man,
Yeah.
torn between different sides of his personality.
Yeah. Yeah. There was this real tension. Um, he loved pleasure.
Right.
He, enjoyed dancing and socializing,
Uh,
but then he also had this very serious introspective side.
Right.
Green actually shares this anecdote
Mm,
about MLK.
yeah.
He got caught dancing by his strict father.
Oh, wow.
And Green thinks this might have, contributed to his conflict avoidance later in life.
Interesting.
It just shows you, even people who achieve great things,
Mm.
they wrestle with these internal conflicts.
Yeah, I mean, and on top of that, you have the weight of expectation, right? Following in his dad's footsteps as a minister.
Right.
It makes you wonder how much of that early path he was on was really his,
Yeah,
you know?
it's true. But then we see this turning point, right?
Yeah.
It happens during the Montgomery bus boycott.
Oh,
This is where MLK, he seems to find his true calling.
right.
Green describes it as this profound experience. MLK hears God's voice.
Okay.
But he emphasizes this voice. It's more than just, a religious experience.
So for those of us who might not interpret it in that religious context, what does that voice represent?
It's about finding that deep inner conviction, that connection to something bigger than yourself.
Mm.
Think about the issues or causes that light a fire in you,
Right.
where you feel compelled to act. That's your voice speaking.
I like that. And then for MLK, this newfound sense of purpose, it really transformed him.
Totally.
He went from this conflicted young man
Right.
to this leader that could withstand incredible pressure. Like when his house was bombed, right? He didn't crumble.
Yeah.
He just became even more resolute. It's almost like purpose became like his armor.
Really quite remarkable. But Green also highlights that MLK's leadership went way beyond just, giving these inspiring speeches.
Right.
This guy was a master strategist.
Okay.
He really understood how to create leverage
Hmm.
and how to grab the nation's attention.
And that's a really important point because it suggests that purpose isn't just about, being passionate about something.
Right.
It's about taking strategic action.
Exactly. And sometimes that means making tough choices,
Right.
even controversial ones, like when he involved children in the Birmingham campaign.
Yeah.
That raises some difficult questions,
Yeah.
about whether the ends justify the means
Right.
when you're going after some greater good.
Yeah. So it really begs the question, how far are we willing to go for the things we believe in?
That's something we all have to consider.
Mhm.
But moving beyond MLK's specific journey, Green, he makes this point that each individual's unique traits, their talents, they're essential for a thriving society.
Oh,
It's like
right.
we're all, pieces of this giant puzzle,
Right.
and the world needs our specific shape.
That's a great analogy. So how do we actually go about uncovering that unique piece of the puzzle, our own calling?
Well, Green says we should start by, thinking back to our childhood.
Okay.
Before society's expectations and pressures really took hold.
Right.
He points to people like Marie Curie, she was fascinated by her father's chemistry set
Wow.
when she was only 4 years old.
Wow. 4 years
Or
old.
Steve Jobs, totally absorbed by the gadgets in an electronics store window.
Right.
These moments of like visceral fascination,
Well,
these early, glimpses of passion,
mm.
they're like clues to our innate strengths.
So it's almost like our calling, it's there from the beginning, just
Yeah.
waiting to be rediscovered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to uncover it, Green says we need to think about those tasks or activities that feel naturally easy for us.
Right.
The things we lose track of time doing.
Right.
It's a sign we're tapping into our inherent abilities.
So what stands out to you in your own life? What were you drawn to as a child? What do you find yourself like effortlessly engrossed in?
That's the first step. And we're going to dive deeper into Green strategies for turning those inclinations into a concrete sense of purpose after a quick break.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so we've kind of taken that trip down memory lane, right?
Great.
Trying to unearth those passions and those inclinations we had as kids.
Mhm.
But how do we translate that, those sparks of interest into an actual sense of purpose, something we can like build our lives around?
Well, that's where Green strategies get really interesting. He actually tells us to embrace the negative.
Embrace the negative. Wait, I thought finding your purpose was supposed to be about, feeling good and going after what you love. How does negativity fit into that?
Yeah, it might seem a little counterintuitive at first,
Right?
but Green, he argues that challenges, deadlines, even pain can be catalysts for growth.
Yeah.
It's like physical exercise.
Yeah.
No pain, no gain, right?
Yeah.
It's all about pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones
Mm.
to build resilience and to develop our strengths.
Okay. Okay, I'm starting to see how that kind of lines up with MLK's journey.
Right.
He faced incredible adversity, but
Yeah.
it seemed like it just fueled his resolve.
Exactly. Exactly. Think
Yeah.
about times in your own life when you faced a difficult situation
Mm.
and you came out stronger on the other side.
Right, right.
Those experiences, they might have been uncomfortable, but they're often the crucibles where our true character is forged.
So instead of like shying away from challenges, we should be like actively seeking them out.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying be reckless or anything, but intentionally stepping outside those comfort zones.
Exactly. It's about changing our perspective. Seeing obstacles not as roadblocks, but as opportunities for growth.
Mhm.
And kind of along those lines, Green also talks about absorbing purposeful energy from other people.
Okay.
He uses Coco Chanel as an example.
Okay.
She she would seek out mentors and partners who had the skills and the drive that she felt she lacked.
So it's like being around people who are already living their purpose can actually like elevate our own sense of purpose.
Exactly. It's about the power of mentorship and surrounding yourself with those who embody the qualities you want to develop in yourself. People who challenge you, they support you, they help you grow.
Yeah, so it's about being intentional about who we choose to spend our time with and who we learn from. But once we have that, that sense of direction, that spark of purpose, how do we keep it going? How do we actually take action and start building a life around it?
Well, that's where Green brings in the idea of descending goals.
Okay.
It's all about breaking down those big ambitious dreams
Right.
into smaller, more manageable steps. He describes it as creating a ladder
Okay.
where each rung represents a smaller goal
Right.
that ultimately leads you to that larger vision.
I love that analogy. It makes those big seemingly impossible dreams
Yeah.
feel so much more achievable instead of like being overwhelmed by the whole staircase. We
Yeah.
can just focus on taking one step at a time.
Exactly. Each step, each rung on the ladder, it's like a little victory that keeps us motivated and moving forward. But even as we focus on those smaller goals,
Uh-huh.
it's so important to check in with that big picture,
Yeah.
that overarching vision that gives all our efforts meaning.
Right. So it's about finding that balance between like focused action and staying connected to that why,
Yeah.
the why behind it all. But even with a clear vision and a plan, I imagine staying committed to a purpose, especially over the long haul, can be really tough.
Right.
Life throws us curveballs. There are distractions everywhere. How do we maintain that focus and that drive over time?
Well, that's where Green's final strategy comes in. Losing yourself in the work.
Losing yourself in the work.
Yeah.
Okay. I've definitely experienced that, like getting so caught up in a project that I totally lose track of time. Is that what he's talking about?
That's a great starting point. But Green, he takes it a step further. He's talking about cultivating this state of deep focus and immersion
Mm.
where you transcend your ego
Okay.
and you experience a kind of transcendent joy.
Hmm. It sounds like what some people call like a flow state, right?
Yeah.
Where you're just completely absorbed in the creative process.
Exactly, exactly. And Green, he says that while we can't always, control when those flow states happen,
Right.
we
What?
can create the conditions that make them more likely.
Hmm.
It's about making time for uninterrupted work,
Yeah.
minimizing those distractions,
Right.
and shifting our focus from ourselves to the work itself.
So it's not about seeking external validation or praise.
Right.
It's about finding that reward, that intrinsic reward in the act of creation itself.
Precisely.
I think Green used Ingrid Bergman as an example,
Yeah.
who, was known for her intense transformative action process
Yeah.
to illustrate this idea of losing yourself in the work.
Exactly. And the beauty of those peak experiences is that they become almost addictive.
Yep.
Once we taste that level of fulfillment,
Mm-hmm.
all those fleeting pleasures, all the distractions the world offers,
Right.
they pale in comparison.
It sounds like cultivating a sense of purpose. It's about so much more than just setting goals
Right.
or following our passions, right? It's about developing that inner strength, that resilience, and
Yeah.
that capacity for deep focus that
Mhm.
allows us to really make a difference.
And it's also about recognizing the potential pitfalls along the way.
Okay.
All those tempting but ultimately empty paths.
Right.
He calls them false purposes.
Right.
And he actually has a lot to say about those tempting distractions that could really lead us astray.
Right.
Remember that quote from Nietzsche? Man would rather have the void as purpose than be void of purpose.
Yeah, that's powerful and kind of unsettling. I'm definitely interested to explore those false purposes and how to avoid them. But before we do that, let's take a minute to just kind of reflect on what we've learned so far. We've talked about the paradox of choice, the importance of finding our own unique voice, embracing the negative as a catalyst for growth,
Mm-hmm.
and the power of surrounding ourselves with purposeful people. We even explored some strategies like descending goals and losing yourself in the work to
Mm-hmm.
help us stay focused and motivated. It's a lot to take in, but it's incredibly insightful.
It really is, and in the last part of our deep dive, we'll go into those false purposes, those tempting distractions
Yeah.
that can lead us astray,
Right.
so we can stay on that path
Right.
toward true fulfillment.
Okay, so let's get back to these false purposes.
Okay.
I'm really curious to hear more about what Green has to say about these paths that seem tempting but end up being empty.
Well, he talks about a few common traps
Yeah.
that we often fall into
Right.
when we're searching for meaning and direction,
Yeah.
and one of the biggest ones, especially nowadays, is this whole pursuit of pleasure.
Yeah.
Just for pleasure's sake.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we live in a culture of instant gratification, so
Yeah.
it's easy to fall into that. But how do we how do we know the difference between, enjoying things, which is healthy,
Right.
and pleasure becoming this false purpose?
That's a great question. Obviously pleasure is a natural part of life,
Right.
and it's important.
Right.
But it becomes a problem when it's the main thing driving us.
Okay.
When we're constantly chasing that next hit of dopamine,
Right.
whether it's through, entertainment or shopping or substances or whatever our particular vice might be.
So it's like we're so focused on feeling good right now that we lose sight of any bigger purpose or goals.
Exactly. Exactly. And the problem is it creates this cycle
Okay.
of diminishing returns. We need more and more stimulation just to get the same level of pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
and it just ends up leaving us feeling empty and unsatisfied.
It reminds me of that saying, the pleasure fades, but the mortgage remains.
Exactly. Yeah, we might get this temporary high,
Right.
but it's not a sustainable source of fulfillment.
It's not going to last.
No, it's not. And Green contrasts that
Okay.
with this idea of finding deeper, more lasting satisfaction
Right.
by doing things that challenge us, things
Mhm.
that require, effort and dedication.
Right, like think back to those peak experiences we were talking about. They
Yeah.
they don't come from just passively consuming things, right? They
Yeah.
come from actively creating and really engaging with something. So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure, it's about finding those pleasures that are aligned
Yes.
with growth and purpose.
Absolutely. It's about finding the joy in the process, not just the end result.
I like that. Okay, so what about some of the other false purposes that Green talks about?
Right.
I remember you mentioning like getting caught up in cults or in
Well,
unhealthy causes.
yeah. Yeah, that's another.
Yep.
Green, he says that healthy causes, they come from, our own internal process of thinking and conviction.
Right.
We've thought deeply about the
Mhm.
issues, and we're supporting them because they genuinely align with our values and our purpose.
Right. Right.
But with cults or these unhealthy causes, it's more about just blindly following some charismatic leader
Right.
or adopting a set of beliefs without really questioning them.
So it's important to like think critically about these things, right?
Yeah.
And not just blindly accept what we're told. To really examine like why we're doing something and make sure
Mhm.
it lines up with our own values.
Exactly,
Huh?
exactly. And another red flag is when the focus is all on negativity,
Oh.
on tearing other people down
Right.
rather than building something positive.
Yeah.
Green says that true purpose is about contributing to the world,
Right.
not just, venting our frustrations or feeling superior to others.
It's about creation, not destruction.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing another common false purpose is this pursuit of money and success just for the sake of it.
You got it. Green, he points out that while financial security is important,
Right.
when money becomes the primary goal in life, it often leads to this very shallow and unfulfilling existence.
It's like we can achieve all the outward signs of success, right?
Mhm.
But still feel empty inside.
Yeah, because we're not connected to our true calling, our unique contribution to the world.
Right, right.
And Green says it's kind of ironic, but true success, it often comes as a byproduct
Okay.
of pursuing our purpose with excellence. When we're focused on creating something valuable,
Yeah.
the money and the recognition, they often follow naturally.
So it's not about chasing the money, it's about creating something that's worthy of being valued.
I like that. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so what about fame and attention? Is that always a false purpose?
It's a tricky one. Green, he acknowledges that we all have this need
Yeah.
for recognition and validation.
Right.
But it becomes a problem when it's the main thing driving us.
Okay.
And especially now, in this age of social media, it's so easy to get caught up
Yeah.
in the numbers game.
The likes and the followers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like we're constantly looking for external validation
Right.
instead of cultivating a sense of self-worth from within.
Yeah, and it can become this addictive cycle, right? We chase the likes and the followers and the praise, but it's also fleeting and
Yeah.
superficial.
It is. And Green, he says that real fulfillment comes from that internal satisfaction
Right.
that comes from creating something meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether other people, validate it or not.
It's about the work itself, not the applause.
Exactly. And then finally, he talks about cynicism.
Cynicism. Okay. That one seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
How can cynicism be a purpose, even if it's a false one?
Well, Green's point is that for some people, believing that life is meaningless, that nothing really matters,
Mm-hmm.
it can actually give them a sense of purpose.
Okay.
It's a way for them to feel superior to those who still believe in things.
It's like they have this I've seen it all, nothing surprises me kind of attitude.
Exactly. But Green says this is a cop-out.
It's a way to avoid the hard work of actually finding meaning and making a contribution. And he quotes Dostoevsky, who said, "If people are deprived of the immeasurably great, they will not live and will die in despair."
So it's about choosing to believe in something,
Right.
to find that spark of wonder and possibility, even when when things are tough.
Yeah, it's about embracing the mystery and the beauty, not
Yeah.
just focusing on the darkness.
And ultimately, I think that's the key takeaway from this whole deep dive,
I
right?
think so too.
We all have this need for purpose,
Yeah.
but it's up to us to cultivate it,
Yeah.
to choose the paths that lead to growth and contribution and a deeper connection to something bigger than ourselves.
And to be aware of those false purposes,
Right.
those tempting things that ultimately just lead to emptiness and regret. It's like we have this one precious life, this opportunity to create something meaningful. Why waste it chasing shadows, right?
Exactly. And who knows, maybe in the process of discovering our own unique purpose, will become what Green calls force multipliers,
Yeah.
impacting the world in ways we never thought possible.
Just like MLK. So there you have it, a deep dive into this idea of finding your purpose, inspired by the life and philosophy of Martin Luther King Jr. and drawing on the wisdom of Robert Greene. Hopefully this has given you some things to think about and some practical strategies to start using in your own life. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.